There is candy up here in the front, free candy. There is a basket in the back. Okay, and we don't want any coins. No coins, only the soft sway of paper coming down to a blessed home at the bottom of the, yes. Now, in our first session, we did take a look at 3 ways to look at the outline of the letter. And they got closer and closer to almost like a paragraph by paragraph section on it or chapters. But there is a large division to be had, and that is that the first 12 chapters are pretty much into the problems and difficulties that we have because of the situation in Corinth being a mess. And we have our lady Chloe, who only has 1 verse in the entire Bible. So I treasure this. I told you she was in the Wall Street Journal issue on, fall dresses and things like that. There were 47 of them. There were some of them. The celibacy things go too far. And so anyway, but there she is. She's got to see the messages. Okay. They're going across the sea. She's going to give them to somebody. You're going to put them on a boat and they're going to go to Ephesus.
One verse and 1 verse.
Oh. 1 verse per verse.
This is Roberta Frost here. With a great sense for poetry and measurement. That's wonderful. That's beautiful. You've been hanging around me too much.
It can't be quoted. It says made in China.
I thought I'd begin with something from John of the Cross. Because tomorrow we're in All Souls Day, today we're in All Saints Day, and most of the saints, of course, are themselves deceased because you have to go through after your death at least 25 years. Now in the early church, people were named saints almost by acclamation and mostly by towns. And the towns or cities would want to have their beloved given over to the title of saint. And so that there were kind of contests. I hate to put it in a crude way, because this is all resembling holiness. But there are people who want to have their saint in their town honored. And so we actually have on a list, if you want the list, 5,000 saints. And those 5,000 saints could be identified with some kind of heritage. In other words, we would know them and not just know the name. So that's how we kind of siphoned off the ones who just, were a friendly person for your particular place. Some of the tortures of the early church were unbelievably difficult to describe, burnings and this, that, the other thing. And I won't go into them. I do know that the church had itself a martyrology, and it would read that in monastic things. When I was in a monastic program for 4 years up in Canada, and they would have in these martyrologies the saints of the day, and there could be anywhere from 1 to 6 or 7, and they would describe how they died. And you can imagine in the early church, practically all of them died because of persecution and dismissal. We think of all the famous ones from that particular time. And they carried that on into heritage because people would remember them and their name and their things. And so I thought I would give something from John of the Cross, because we're a people of image, are we not? We love to have images. And John of the Cross himself was treated harsh by the regular Carmelites. I hate to tell you that. Yeah, they locked him in a closet in the basement and almost starved him and things like that. And he put up with it. But after they came out, they formed what they call the Discalced Carmelites. And that was because of John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila felt that the Carmelites at that time had fallen into some of the culture of Europe and consequently were doing as much as they should. and which meant more of a prayer life. And so they call themselves discalced, which means that they would walk around resembling the poor people by wearing sandals as opposed to wearing shoes. So discalced in the original language, Latin, was without shoes. So, and I was just received an email this morning from one of my former students back at Mount Carmel decades ago, and said, I've just been asked to go to a place in Pennsylvania where we have an outlet for our plumbing company. And it's the Discalced Carmelite Hermits. Now, we ourselves, our province, we have hermits. And there are various places like Texas and other places. They live by themselves or maybe in a very close continuity to somebody else. But they are hermits. Hermits means that you live your life of prayer by yourself. That's how the Carmelites got started in the kind of canyon, if you want to call it, the Wadi, south of Mount Carmel itself. And for decades upon decades, people that were left over, the soldiers left over from the Crusades, would go into these caves there and other things and develop a religious life, because that's what they were, very deeply devoted to the religious life. And then they received a approval from Saint Albert eventually. And along with the Franciscans, Dominicans, Benedictines, and the Carmelites all seem to have come together in the 13th century. And so what John of the Cross is doing is he's talking about the bow and arrow. He says, and talking about preparing for death. You let my suffering cease, for there was no one who could cure them. I'm thinking of our beloved doctor and deacon who is going to be honored tomorrow, Jim. So for blood. So there's no one who could cure them. Now let my eyes behold your face, for you are our only love. He's talking to God. My spirit's body is rising near. This earth a bow that shot me. Now lift me into your arms as something precious that you dropped. What an image. In other words, how precious are you? Well, you're something like that was super valuable, and all of a sudden it was dropped. Oh my. And then picked up with such kind of carefulness. And so when we have the Foodie funeral tomorrow, we're going to have that kind of a sense, that there was a suffering that no one could cure, but his body is rising near. Lift me as your arms is something precious. Okay. My only suffering from this day forth will be your divine beauty. And you will constantly cure my blessed sight each time you bring your face so near to mine and call me bride. Do not be sad, my old friends. Look, these wings are finely stretched and laughing. So our souls are rising near to you, this earth a bow that shot us. Now lift me in your arms, dear God, like something precious that you dropped. See how quick that little poem is, and yet how personal it is. Look at these wings, they're stretched and laughing. Why? Because we've entered into the kingdom. You bring your face near to mine. You call me bride. See? And that's right from the Song of Songs, is it not? Here comes my beloved bounding over the hills. When you see this described in actual texts that have drawings and stuff, you see this kind of a male deer bouncing over the hills, only to get down where you've kind of got a little enclave there of a fence around, and you jump over that, and then the door is closed, but the lattice, the blinds are there, and so the sticks his head through the lattice, says, my beloved, my dear, let arise. And he says, your voice is sweet. He says, the winter is over, the rains are done. It is all now just glory. So this is in the Song of Songs, right at the very beginning. So anyway, that's John of the Cross. What Paul is eventually going to do is to tackle this image. Will be a help for him, because what it is when we've covered this thoroughly, is the feeling that the end of time is here. Paul even alludes to that 3 or 4 times here. He says, and the time is drawing near. And so what would you do for that? Well, you would take it from the learned saint. You would say, well, he's got the connections with God, so it must, the end of time must be coming soon. I just received a book in the mail of someone who disagrees with some of the material that we're doing to sense ourselves that the future of the world is going to collapse. We were told that just some 6 years ago or so that there were only 12 years left. This is by a congresswoman. There's only 12 years left, and then the earth is going to end. Why is it going to end? Because of the heat and everything overtaking us. Scientists say the heat will be maybe a 0.1 or 0.2 or something like that by the end of the century. And by that time, we will have figured out how to deal with such an advance of heat. And they want to place all of the various things that are happening that are normal. If you take 100 years of tornadoes and other type things and heated times and cold times, stuff like that, you would find out that we're not far off from that. So anyway, the point is that this man is thinking that within 30 years time, we are going to be into a cold period. Well, remember Time magazine in 1979, they said the climate change, they're all upset, be careful. But what was it about? It was about a cold time coming. If you go back to the 12 or 1300s, they had a cold time that kind of shut down a lot of their farming. So when the sun came out, things like that, oh, wow, it was glorious. So anyway, why am I talking about those? Because in fact, what they're talking about is that, we'll address this tomorrow with Jim Foodie, who has now gone to the kingdom. And so the purpose of thinking about the end time is that there will be an end time for us individually. And so I think that's how the church took a look at Paul's comments, that the world is going to experience this, and just put it into a person. So the second part of the letter, after these problems are solved, probably start around chapter 12 or so. We're going to get part of that now because we're going into the Eucharist. And that will be, a kind of the sole function will be these last chapters of what it is to live in a world where Christ has risen from the dead and taken us. So let's go to chapter 9, if you don't mind. Is that where we're starting today? Right. We're going to try to get through as much as we can. We're hoping that we can get to a point where in one of our sessions we can have some film. Paul writes as an apostle. See, some say, well, he's not an apostle, he's like a missionary or an evangelist. And Paul is going to claim the word apostle because of the fact he was knocked over and put into a trance and blinded, and then studied out in the desert. And it was only, if that happened in the early 30s, it's only in 49 when he starts his missionary journey. So all that in between is arguing, debating, or challenging Peter in Antioch, who's there with the Gentiles, and the Jewish people in Jerusalem, who are saying, no, you have to become a Jew first. So all of that kind of takes up some of the first part of Paul's life. But here we are now with Corinthians, and this is where Paul, in the year 56 or so, because he was in Corinth, we say somewhere around the year 50, 51 for a year and a half. And now he's over in Ephesus. As I've told you before, you can go across if you like for 300 miles on a boat, or what you can do is take the 900-mile walk around like a big horseshoe. Says, let's continue. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? See, what does he mean by free? He's free from the shackles of sin. He's free from that which would hold him down and make him unavailable for transport to the heavenly kingdom. Says, am I not an apostle? What is an apostle? It's the word means one who is sent. And so yes, he is one who is sent. Have I not seen Jesus the Lord? Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that was for some the very definition of what an apostle is, that you've seen the risen Christ. Well, that's what the apostles did. They saw the risen Christ. And now Paul is coming in and saying, well, that happened to me too. Says, are you not my work in the Lord? In other words, isn't he doing what an apostle does, which is specifically to go to the world? What is, we repeat this over and over and over again, but I'll do it again. If you go to Matthew chapter 28, 18 to 20, the last two verses of the gospel, it says, all authority, Jesus is saying, because he's quoting Daniel, he's taking Daniel's kind of point of view. Daniel had the God above, in the clothing that what we would kind of understand because he's long white beard and a long coat, and the people of God come to him. So there he is. He's the one, the aged one, the Lord God, and who comes before him is the one who is going to be the apostle to him. And so he says and we translate this into what Jesus says. So I'm going to get into chapter 18 now. All authority in heaven and on earth. He's quoting the Daniel situation of God talking to the Son of Man. So here you have the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. And now we are talking about God, the Father, and Jesus, the Christ. Okay, and he says, all authority in heaven and on earth have been given to me. Therefore, go forth and baptize, teach people to obey everything I told you. I will be with you to the end of time. See, so when you get that kind of language, what Paul says, well, that I belong in there. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm preaching to all people. He's not doing the baptizing, but his churches are doing the baptizing. He mentions two that he did, but that's really up to the church to do this. So here's the favorite image I would have for these things. I know I'm a little bit off track, but you say, well, we're used to that. So let's say you want to have a drink of wine. That's a nice thought. How would you go about getting some wine? Well, you'd go out, you'd break the earth, you'd put some seeds in, they would grow up to be a plant. And from the plant would come grapes. And from the grapes, you would squash, then you would ferment with yeast. And then it starts, and then you would put it into a barrel and you would let it sit for a while. And you could do it real quick, but that'd be a little bit sour. So you let it, and then like some of the famous ones are, from Spain and stuff like that, where they have, a sherry comes from a sherry barrel and stuff like that. So anyway, so you have this wine is on your mind. But what do? You start with the beginning and you go through a whole series of stages. Well, what is the goal of God, the Father? It is to have Christ, the person of God, God himself, outside of God. And in order to do so, you have to move into time and place. Otherwise, you're still totally divine. Don't take my language, don't mess with it. Not so. What I'm doing is because love tends to express itself. So what happens here is love has to have an object to love. And so this sounds like what we call anthropomorphism, which is trying to make God into a human experience, but it has something of that. In other words, God has made a plan. So you think, well, God started with Adam and then we made a mess out of it, then God has to send Jesus. That is off track itself. What God did was says, I want to have my son, my beloved son, in union with me, with a situation outside of us that can come and share in our divinity. It's like taking in an orphan, or taking in a young child, or taking in, a different race, color, creed, age, or whatever it is. God wanted to have that to be loved. And so in order to do so, you have to have it. And in order to have it, you have to have Jesus the Christ outside of time. God is not going to create an Eden and just leave it there and stuff like that. And you say, well, this is great. Every single day we got new food and nice green grass and all of that. No, what we need is something that is in touch with the divine. So if there was no sin, it could very well have been that the heavenly eternal life could have started right then with Adam and Eve. You're saying, no, that's not possible. And so what Jesus would do is he would walk with you. Remember that famous song? He will walk with me. He will talk with me. So if there wasn't the sin of humankind, we might still be in Eden, but we're not. And so you might call this proleptic, which is this, biblical language of scholars, saying that God had something in mind at the end. And the thing he had in mind at the end was the divine one. So now what we're doing then is we are on the way. And so have I not seen Jesus the Lord? I'm an apostle. I am for you. You are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. You see, in other words, this is what is happening now. We're in the progress towards the heavenly kingdom, necessary because of our sin. So it says, I might not be apostle for others. Certainly I am for you. Now, don't you love this? What he's saying to the people of Corinth is, I could go all over the place. I could do all kinds of things. I loved Philippi. I loved Thessalonica. I loved Ephesus. I loved the places. I went to all of them. My friend Timothy was with me now. He was there in in the first missionary journey I had, and he's with me. And later on, Luke will be with him. And so this is what he's saying, about your value. And so does that mean he doesn't love the others? No, if he was with them, he might say the same thing. But he said, I'm an apostle for you. At this time and this place, I am for you. You're the seal of my apostleship. My defense against those who would pass judgment on me is this. Do we not have the right to eat and drink? See, this is a parallelism. Do we not have the right to take along a Christian wife? See, he's been talking about that in our previous chapters, as do the rest of the apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas, who is Peter. See, he says, if it is only myself and Barnabas who did not have the right to work. No, they were the ones who were sent on the journey. He says, so anyway, Paul, he says, is going to do his work. In other words, he has the right to do that. Why? So that people don't think that he's doing all this for money. I listened to a black radio the other day, and they had a wonderful preacher on there, and he was talking about all the jobs that he was given, and all these jobs were high paying, $100,000 jobs and stuff. He turned them all down so that he become a preacher. And then I'm thinking, wow, that's terrific. Now, and I'm not talking about him. He gave up everything in his life that could have been valuable. But if you go to some of the preachers that are on TV and they're making $40 million a year, or the one in Atlanta is worth $200 million, you think, well, they really haven't given up that much. So whoever serves as a soldier at his own expense, he says, who plants a vineyard without eating its produce? Who shepherds a flock without using some of the milk from the flock? So he's saying, these are things I deserve. I deserve to be fed by you. I deserve to be taken care of by you. He says, I'm not going to do that. Am I saying this on human authority? Does the law also speak of these things? Yes. It is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. So, he uses this ox thing over and over again. Remember why? Because he's got into that mode of thinking that what we do all the time is we plow. And after we plow, we put in the seed. After the seed, it grows to a beautiful flower. What will he say later on in Corinthians? He says, and Jesus picks up on this, chapter 12, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground, it remains just a grain of wheat. So that's what's happening here. It says, am I saying this in human authority? Does the law speak? It is written in the law of Moses. Okay. Or verse 10, or is he not really speaking for our sake? It was written for our sake because the plowman should plow in hope and the thresher in hope of receiving a share. So what he's talking about here is something like that he is going to do that. And as a result, people are going to take care of him. He says, if we have sown spiritual seed for you, it's a great thing that we reap a material harvest from you. Question. Others share this rightful claim on you. Do we not steal more? See? So what he's done is he made the stage. And what is the stage? The stage is that he is entitled to physical, monetary, meals, place to stay, support. And he says, am I going to do that? No. He turns it down. Verse 13 or 12. Reason for not using his rights. That's the next part of it. Yet we have not used this right. On the contrary, we endure everything so as not to place an obstacle to the gospel of Christ. See, because what he's doing, he's saying is I'm not here because of the money I can make or the wealth that I can have or even the comfort that I can have. So what he does is he goes about along with Priscilla and Aquila and Corinth, and they make leather goods. So let's continue. We have not used this because we don't want to place an obstacle to the gospel of Christ. In other words, say, wow, that Paul, he came to us and look at that. He gave up everything just so he could love us. Says, others share this rightful claim on you. Do we still have more? He says, so if you go to verse 14, same way the Lord ordered those who preach the gospel should live by the gospel. But I have not, and I bracketed this off, I have not used any of these rights, however, nor do I write this, that it be done so in my case. I would rather die. Oh my goodness, he's really putting it on the line here, isn't he? Says, I would rather die than act like a person who's trying to milk the cow of the faithful people. So he says, for an obligation has been imposed on me, and woe to me if I do not preach it. See, this is, I put down in the commentary, Paul at his best, his very best. He's telling us by explanatory terms why it is that he is totally for them, morning, noon, and night. If I do so willingly, I have a recompense, but if unwillingly, then I'm entrusted with a stewardship. What then is my recompense? Here we get it. That when I preach, I offer the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. Next section, all things to all. Although I am free in regard to all, I have made myself a slave to all, so as to win over as many as possible. Now, I've covered this idea before, so let's just repeat it. When they say slave in those days, they mean slave of a whole variegated ladder of what you are as a slave. The worst slaves are the ones who come, and this can be gross, and it's going to be gross. So I'm sorry. 2 popes were given this. There was a fight between which one was the pope. They sent them both off to the mines on an island, and they came there, and the first thing was they were castrated. Then they were taken in there, they were put in shackles around their ankles, and then they were whipped, and then they went to work in the mines, and they were to work for 6 months. Why 6 months? Because they'll be dead by then. In other words, the next group that comes in, the same thing happens. Same thing happens. You cannot be working in this mine and think that you're going to escape and get back to your normal life. You're not. You're going to die. So maybe in the 4th month or 5th month. Why? Because you're starved. If you go to Dachau in its worst moments, they would tell you that the people in prison there would have the same calorie count as 2 Coca-Colas. And so then you're supposed to live on that. That's why when you see these pictures, all you see is rib cages and stuff. And so that's what's happening here. This is a place of punishment. So that's the extreme. The next thing is, as you keep going up and stuff like that, you could be walking around in a very nice toga with some decorations on and stuff like that. Why? Because you speak Greek, and you're going to teach the family's kids Greek, and you're going to be a teacher to them about Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. And so you're going to be a learner for them. Others are going to be chefs for them. Others are going to be working in an army. Others are going to be working cleaning the streets. What are the highest in Jerusalem? Let's go to Jerusalem, time of Jesus. What is the highest paid person in Jerusalem? You say, how do you know that? I have elements of knowledge that cannot be challenged because they're either right or wrong. Take your pick. It's the manure shovelers. They came around at nighttime with their wheelbarrows, with their donkeys and stuff like that. And they picked up because you took all human waste and other type things. And that's why they have ledges outside of your window. So you could dump it out in the street. Also, if you wanted to walk, you walked underneath those ledges and you didn't walk in the other stuff. And so at nighttime, they would come and they would take all that, then they'd take it outside the city. And to get that kind of work done as a job was worth it. Throw some coins to those guys. We don't need that stuff around. Okay. So I've told you now the profundity of my awareness of life at the time of Jesus. So to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win over Jews. In other words, Paul is saying, and this is the truth. What he's saying is that because he knows that the scriptures, Gamaliel are the 2 guys who know the scriptures more than anybody else. All of these wonderful books of the Old Testament. And right up to the time of Jesus, they were still writing it because about 50 years before Christ came the book of wisdom. You know, we read that for a couple of days upstairs, wisdom. And it was written by a single wise man who did precisely of trying to get the elements of the ages to come on into them. There were other books like Proverbs and stuff like that. How did Proverbs start? It says, Lady Wisdom. Lady Wisdom means that the Holy Spirit was in a woman as the earth was created, the cosmos created, and humankind were created. That's the Holy Spirit, and they call it Lady Wisdom. So what we have here is wisdom of a different type. It's more erudite. And anyway, so what he's saying is, I became a Jew. In other words, I can tell you the scriptures, I can tell you the rituals, I can tell you the rites, I can tell you the laws, the 613 of them, because he says, to those under the law, I became like one under the law. He returns now to those 613 legal things and comes back into it. And so these would be the things of food and cleansing and other type things. Men had less laws than women did. And so although I myself am not under the law, why? Because he has now been knocked over and in a way canonized before his death and became an apostle. He says to win over those under the law. Do you see all this works together? He's saying, I do not belong to the law anymore, but the reason for that is so that you can come out of the law. To those outside the law, I became one like outside the law. Though I'm not God's law, but within the law of Christ to win over those outside the law. To the weak, I became weak to win over the weak. I have become all things to all to save at least some. See, I put down there again, Paul at his best. Do you not know that the rumors in the stadium all run in the race? The runners in the stadium all run in the race, but only one wins the prize. Run so as to win. Now, doesn't he say that in one of his letters later on? I have run the race. I have fought the fight. I deserve the crown that I get. You say, well, that's braggadocio. No, it's not. Not at all. It's the confidence he has that he is not his own, that he is the vehicle by which God communicates to people. So if that is what he is, then he himself is, catch my language here, quasi-glorified before his death. Quasi-glorified in this sense that the Holy Spirit has overtaken him. It's not like Paul wakes up in the morning and says, well, between 10 and 12, I'm going to be under the Holy Spirit. Oh. Yeah, I used to have more weight, and so I used to lift weights in the morning. How did you do that? Well, I got out of bed. So anyway, we continue. So Paul is into this. Why is he going to use so many of these athletic things? Because they have athletic games there, just like we have the Olympics. Every 2 years, they have the Corinthian games. And they are, people come in from outside around, and they have races and wrestling and all the other things, spear throwing and discus throwing. You could see this in Riesenthal's, Lenny Riesenthal's movie on the joy of athleticism. She was a filmer for Adolf Hitler, and so she would stand in front of him on the conveyance they had and take up to face pictures of Hitler as he goes through the crowd, waving and stuff. Hundreds of thousands come out to see him. First of all, the plane comes around each of these cities. He goes to 20 some planes in a weekend, and he has this plane comes around, then it lands, and stuff like that. And the tension is getting high. If you are inside at Nuremberg, inside the stadium, there's 200,000 people there, especially a whole section for the young. And then, kind of it lands. Then he comes through the streets, and you have all this kind of stuff, and people are waving at him and all that kind of stuff. And so for him, it's kind of an enhancement. And so then he walks into, and he's got one person on one side, in the midst of 200,000 people, one man walking up, to get to speak to them. Can you imagine all this stuff? Oh, you got to chill, and you're just hearing about it. So what she does then is she makes another movie on the Olympics in 1936. And you can see it, her taking, first of all, they got all the Jews outside of Berlin, and they went into this. And we did a program here one time on the boys in the boat. So, but anyway, they took these pictures of what it was for athleticism. And it was magnificent because she stopped being a provocateur for Adolf Hitler, because they were supposed to go up and shake his hand. Well, he never did that, and so instead, what happened was because of that, they had these. She got into the artistry of athleticism. So what we're doing here, when Paul is talking about this runners in the stadium, he's just not talking about some thing you do on Saturday, run around and stuff like that. We're talking about the elegance of the best athletes in the Mediterranean are here for these events. And so when Paul's talking about it, he's talking about it as something of a perfection. So he says, the runners in the stadium all run in the race. Only one wins. So you are the one to win. Says every athlete exercise discipline every way they do it to win a perishable crown, but we an imperishable. And see what he's doing. He's using that whole experience of athleticism to talk about the fact that he's going to get a crown. This will be his other letter. Says, I do not run aimlessly, do not fight as if I were shadow boxing. These are real punches. No, I drive my body and train for fear they have preached to others. I myself should be disqualified. See, so I put down there. Remember that in Corinth, they witnessed the Isthmian games played every second and fourth year of Olympiad in the Isthmus of Corinth. Okay, now that finishes our section here on chapter 9. Do you have a page after chapter 9 before we go into? Did we not read this at one time? You want, let's just read a part of it again. How utterly mysterious, Creator Spirit, in this existence you have placed us all. Now, is this written at the time of Paul? It sounds like it, doesn't it? It was written at our time by a scientist. If we were to despair of understanding it at all, we would feel justified. In other words, we can't make sense out of what's happening in the world today. So does every kind of love, with beauty and wisdom and the makeup of every tree and star. In other words, we get 4 lines that tell us that the world itself is on a downspin. Is it not? All the grain and stuff like that the Russians have been bringing in to feed other countries, stuff like that, they stopped shipping it. So that the world itself, the globe itself, is suffering from this one man. One man is making the world suffer. And here we are pouring billions of dollars away so that we can take care of, perhaps peace and justice. All of that happening for one man's evil. So when we start to meditate on what is happening, most of us want to give up and just say, we can't do anything about it. So let's go on with our parties, our prayers, our life, our work, our friendship, our love, our all these things. Let's go with that, because what else can we do? I'm sorry to depress you, but the world's depressing us. When they start talking about how your savings and your other things are losing money for it, means what's going to happen in the future. Let's go to Corinthians now, chapter 10. Now in 10:1-13, the question I have on the first page, if you take a look at, Paul refers to the Exodus experience of the Hebrews. What are some of these? So let's go to chapter 10 and see, why is Paul going back to Moses? The Exodus experience of the Hebrews, their march. Now I put up there, just to get ready for this, if you want a little anxiety about what's going to happen. The problem is this: community worship. Paul has 2 ideas in the letter, period. Everything else builds up to these 2 thoughts. The one we've already identified, which is the resurrection of the body. Not resurrection, but resurrection of the body. You got to remember that, that we are going to be glorified. So it's not a soul, that goes off into the mist and stuff like that. How can you be playing bridge or going bowling or playing golf and stuff like that if you're just a soul? So there's this car crash, and a husband and wife are sadly killed, and they go up to heaven, and they get a tour, because that's, they have these angels, they just give a tour. So it's heaven. So so anyway, you don't want to miss anything. So they take you down the streets of gold and stuff like that. They say, here's your house. It's a big mansion. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Then he goes across and says, we're hungry. We'll sit down and eat. He says, no, because they will be stuffed. No, eat all you want and you'll never be stuffed. And stuff. And what do you like? Blueberry muffins? Yeah, blueberry muffins. My wife cooks blueberry muffins. Blueberry muffins. Yeah. So anyway, so they go on and said, do you like golf? He says, yeah, we can play today. I have to tell you that every hole is a hole in one. Says, did you like dancing? Yes, well, you can dance, and you can dance on your fingers. The things up here are different. And he says, well, when do we sleep and all this? Oh, you never sleep in heaven. It's just all joy. So he turns to his wife, says, you and your damn blueberry muffins, we could have been here 10 years ago. Okay, what verse is that? So let's continue. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of our ancestors were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. See, under the cloud was the cloud of leading them through the desert to get to the sea, and then the sea they're going to cross. You're with me on this, aren't you? Because this is, the typical thing you see, in the movies. So then all of them were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So here we have what we call baptism. Now, when John the Baptist does his baptism, he is thinking of it as cleansing. And so that's why he says Jesus says you have to be baptized in water and the Spirit. because the cleansing cleans your soul. The Spirit feeds your soul. So that's what baptism is. So the washing we have here that Moses gives is the cleansing. And we know that the Spirit of God is going to be in every one of us from beginning to end of creation. So there is something of the Spirit there, but we're talking about the difference of the Spirit there and the Spirit that comes to us with Jesus at Pentecost. So all ate the same spiritual food, all drank the same spiritual drink. See, that's the Exodus. For they drank from a spiritual rock. See, remember that? Yahweh is the rock of his people, and he becomes a spiritual rock that gives them water that followed them, and the rock was the Christ. I gave a graduation talk one time at our place, Carmel Catholic, being the principal there, and I use this idea of the rock as in scriptures. I made something like this: 800 million tons of stone, 800 million tons of stone are above the burial place of St. Peter, the rock. Wasn't he called the rock? So here you have the rock, and then you have above him the greatest church of the world, 800 million tons. Well, anyway, I think I'm right on that. So there was a girl there who playing in a championship soccer game, and an opponent, by accident, our player was coming up, kicking the ball in soccer and ready to score, and the other opponent kicked her in the knee and broke her knee, cracked the knee. And so she was on the ground in agony. And as everybody's around her and stuff like that. And of course they get an ambulance is on the way and all that. And everybody's stopped there and paying attention to her. And so I say, you must, usually a person like that would be, screaming or yelling because of the pain, or doing this. Why that, person? Why do they have to kick me? It's going to ruin my career for the rest of the. What does she say? Oh God, I thank you. Out loud, for the people who are here helping me, for the people who are talking to me and worried about me, for the people who are showing their love for me. And then they put her into the stretcher and take her, and some people go with her. The parents now are there too, when they take her down to the hospital. She says the same thing. She never once said something about how this pain is agonizing. Instead, she is saying, thank God for the beautiful people who are, helping me go through this. And she was like that. So that's what we would call a rock. Somebody who's so secure in what their love is in life. And a thing like a broken leg would obviously be, something way out of kilter. But for her, it was an occasion for people to express their love for her. I just mentioned that. Yes, that's an extreme. So the things that he says, God was, let's continue, all drank, and the rock was Christ. Yet God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the desert. See, while Jesus is the source of living water, these people were talking about back here. See, in other words, that was an example is what happened to Moses. And you can see that in Exodus and in Numbers, all these things come up. And in doing so, it says, yet God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the desert. How did that take place? These things happen as an example for us, so we might not desire evil things as they did. Do not become idolaters, as some of them did. As is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. Now, here's where we have to take a slight break to understand the celebration, the party celebration in Rome. And the party celebration, this is vulgar, so be ready. It starts like this. You come with your friends and stuff like that. You get dressed up. You might bring some food along with you, but you have the slaves there to cook the food and all this kind of stuff. And you have a lot of wine, and you keep on going. So now it's a big party, and so the big party goes on with all this delicious food. And so some people go out to barf because of the fact they've had way too much to eat and not enough to drink. And they drink and they drink, and they all become drunk. The men become drunk, and they're lobbing around like this. And what do? They hold hands and stuff like that, and they go down to the local place where there are prostitutes, and they have intercourse with them, because this is the pattern that they would have then, is that they go to the idol and throw something to the idol, and then from there they go to the idol's prostitutes. So here you go through the steps again. They bring some food, they eat too much food, they drink too much, they're drunk, they go down, they throw stuff at the idol, and then they get behind it, and they have their in whatever it is, physical integration with the prostitutes. And you're saying to yourself, well, why are you telling us this? What happened to the people of God in the desert? And this is what Paul's harping on, is that they're walking along through the desert. And, the food back there was better, and here we are out here in this god awful place. We're eating all the stuff they give us. It's the same stuff every day. Let's go back. So they take their jewelry, as you would if you were in the Jewish people for a long time had beautiful jewelry. So anyway, they melted it down to make a calf, and they adore the calf. They're saying this is what is going to save us, and is this amount of cash. And so what happens then is Moses comes down from the mountaintop, and he's got the 2 tablets, and then he throws them on the ground and they break. And so then what's going to happen? Now they're going to be condemned, are they not, for this terrible thing? God wrote those things, and instead what's going to happen is Moses is going to go back and he's screaming, and God says, calm down. He says, and he starts to scratch. Now he uses the word scratch. Scratches into the 10 Commandments. He takes it back down again. And then it says that 23,000 of them fell dead. Why? Because of the fact that they had brought themselves into the realm of evil and it overtook them. It doesn't mean that they were slaughtered or knifed to death or anything. It just meant that they died. Just like people, if Moses held the things up, you didn't die. If he put it down, you died. Well, these died, 23,000. So what's happening is they decided that the ritual that you have at a Roman dinner is what they're going to follow, which is you're going to bring all your good stuff. You're going to make an idol. You're going to give gifts to the idol. Then you're going to get drunk, and then you're going to go out and mess around with the people behind the idol, the women behind the idol. See what I'm saying? So what Paul is doing here very cleverly to the reader who is not into Roman culture would pass over this and say, I understand what Paul is saying, but here it has a deeper meaning to it too. So anyway, and do not become idolaters as some of them did. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. Let us not indulge in immorality as some of them did. See what I'm talking about? That was the immorality that we're talking about with the prostitutes. 23,000 fell within a single day. Let us not test the Lord Christ, as some of them did, and suffered death by serpents. That's the Moses situation. Do not grumble as some of them did, suffer death by the destroyer. These things happened to them as an example. They've been written down as a warning to us upon whom the end of the ages has come. Oh my goodness, he says the end of the ages has come. What do they mean by that? It means that when I gave you that analogy of putting a seed into the ground and it grows up to a vine, what God has done is he had planted the seed, which is our cosmos, and it has grown to its fulfillment, which is Jesus Christ, who is God outside of God. And so what we have there then is this is the kind of the final age, is when Christ is with us. Now it has been spoken. How does it go in John's gospel? In the beginning was the Word. See the expression out, got that? The beginning was the Word was with God. Okay, before. The Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And without him, not a single thing came to be. See, so, and you follow that line of thinking there? It summarizes what we're talking about here. The time is here that God has reached his completion in Jesus. Now all we have to do is go through history. Therefore, whoever thinks he's standing secure should not care to fall. No trial has come to you, but what is human. See, I double line that. God is faithful, will not let you be tried beyond your strength. But with the trial, he will also provide a way out so that you may be able to bear it. Thank you, God, for your saving mercy. This is the prayer of many, is that, you've suffered some terrible, terrible situation in your life. Just it's brought you to your knees and collapse. And then it comes into your soul. God wouldn't do something to me without giving me the strength. And so the strength is that you now are starting to slowly regain over a long period of time, but slowly starting to regain yourself because of the fact that what you had thought was going to be an end of your joyful, meaningful life is the opposite. God has given you strength, and as sad and difficult as these challenges are, we live them. So now the next thing I have blocked off for you is the warning against idolatry. And again, what is our basis of reflection for this? The golden calf. It says, therefore, my beloved, avoid idolatry. I'm speaking to you as sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I'm saying. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not participation in the blood of Christ? Now, here we are. These statements by Paul about the Eucharist are the very first things in the New Testament about the Eucharist outside of Jesus, because the Gospels are written later. And so when they talk about the Last Supper and things, that's later. We are here now in the year 56, writing to the people at Corinth, and Paul is telling them that they have with them the blood of Christ, and with him the bread of life. And so what's happening is that you must have, in order to be a communion person, you have to be in communion with the community. And he's going to make some comments here about this, and they have parallels in our own time and place. I won't go into them. But you cannot be saying that, yes, I have communion, so therefore I'm with Christ, when you turn right around and disobey his basic laws of life. Then you have broken away from the communion. And so it's perfectly right for people to say, then you don't belong to the communion, because you have not been yourself committed to what the communion means, which is the unity with Christ's life. So let's continue with this. The cup of blessing, is it not a participation? I put koinonia, that's the Greek word for this participation. The bread that we break, is it not a participation in the body of Christ? So he's talking about the Eucharist here, and he's talking about it as the focal point for the unity of the thing. So that's why he's upset about these things that we've talked about and we'll talk about. He's upset about these things where you come into the place where they're going to have a mass, a house mass, and it might be maybe 150 people. And you have 50 people are going to be sitting around the pool on the inside. Why? Because they're rich and they brought fancy foods with them. What about the people in the hallways? Well, they're not as rich and they brought some fruit. And what about those people out in front? Well, they don't have anything. You know, they're not dressed right. They don't have any food. You know, they're poor. Oh my goodness. So what does that mean? Well, that means that what we have is gradations as to how you get into the kingdom. That the kingdom of God is not a series of gradations. God's love is the same as is for each and every one of us here. I could be the worst sinner in the whole room and still God would love me. And so anyway, let's continue. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation in the blood and the bread, the body? Because the loaf of bread is one. We, though many, are one body, for we all partake of the one loaf. Now I'm going to jump quickly to Mark, and I'm going to go to Mark chapter 8. And we're going to have in Mark 3 divisions in the first part of his gospel, the part where he was up in Galilee. Okay, 3. The first one is with the Jews. They reject him. They want to kill him. Woo. So the result of his ministry there is a failure. Then he goes to his family, and his family thinks he's crazy. Isn't this Joseph's son? Who's he be talking like that? So they call him crazy. So that's third. He narrows it down and he goes to his disciples. And now we're up to chapter 8, and he takes 2 of his disciples. He says, come with me out onto the lake. And they get out there on the lake. And what does one of the apostles say? We forgot to bring bread. Now, the superficial way to interpret this is, these are Dummkopfs, wie man sagt auf Deutsch. And they can't figure out how to have a picnic. You left the basket with the thermos on the beach. What the heck? Jesus would say, but what the heck good are you? That misses the point. The point is that because we have these statements that are made in scripture that have rich, deep meaning. And what Jesus is meaning is, you have forgotten to bring the unity of the people of God that are represented by the loaf of bread. And that's why he gave to the pagans, if you will, the bread, 4,000 people, which means about 16,000 people, because we're families. And then you get 5,000 people that are, he crosses the lake backwards, and now they get, and he had fed the 5,000 people, the Jewish people. That means 20,000, because they're families. So here he has done is he's multiplied this bread that you can't turn this down. I mean, here, first of all, it's free. See what I mean? So anyway, and what you can do then is you can walk around, with this beautiful bread and the fish. I don't know if you saw my vestment today. If you were at mass, the vestment had on the front, and the blue fish across the front, sewn on it. And below it, there were 5 discs. Well, that was given to me by the people of Jerusalem when I was there this summer, and it was beautiful. And the sewing into it, absolutely incredible. I can't tell you how. So anyway, so they have that. So it's the loaf and the fish. What's one of the very first chapels, churches that they build after the 325, when you can't do that? Well, up on the north bank of Lake Galilee, they build a church. And in that church, they have a floor of mosaics. And on this side, let's pretend this is the altar up here. So on this side, you have mosaics of all the deers and animals and stuff like that, the wolf in the mosaics. Over here, you have all the flowers and stuff like that. You got stuff growing. So they're beautiful mosaics. And then up here, you have the altar. And right in front of the altar is this mosaic, and it has 2 fish coming up out of the basket. See, and a loaf of bread. See, you see what that is? In other words, this church has one of the early symbols of the Eucharist, put into the floor, because this is a church that's going to have mass. And so, sadly, a place called Tabitha, and sadly, it was the roof was burnt about 10 years ago by some rabid Jewish scripture students. Came out and torched it. I hope they're rebuilding it. And that's something, the early church went right to art to display some of these things. But you got to love that. Okay, so let's continue. We're at verse 18. Look at Israel according to the flesh. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? Yes, they eat the sacrifices, participants in the altar. Look at Israel according to the flesh. See, in other words, when they're going to eat this bread and drink this cup, it's real. It's food. It's not kind of like a statement about nourishment. You're supposed to feel better. What am I saying? The meat sacrificed to idols is anything? No. Or that an idol is anything? No. I mean, what they sacrifice to demons? No. Not to God. They do not want you to become participants with a demon. Now here it is. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and also the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and of the table of demons. As I say, in this world of a massive, serious sin of the of people all across the world, and we're torn into this wars and to death and to painful egotism. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord, table of demons. Are we provoking the Lord to jealous anger? Are we stronger than he? Before we leave that, I'm just going to read verse 6. You just read it. These things happen as an example for us, so we might not desire evil things as they did. See that 6? Yeah, if you want to highlight anything, 6. Why does he talk about the rock? Why does he talk about this? Because of the fact that these are symbols for them, kind of representations. So anyway, these are things as examples to us. Okay, now we're going to go to verse 23. This is a difficult verse to handle, and we could do it for a while, but we will not get satisfaction. Everything is lawful, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is lawful, but not everything builds up. So what he's saying is that there are human activities all over the place, but the only ones that are good are what is building up. Everything is lawful. In other words, we have a natural law of humanity, do we not? Were we built, as the Lutherans or Protestants would have it, as total evil and sin, only to be corrected by baptism? And if you don't have that, you are not corrected, and you are, who knows where you're going to go. Because they say that we are ultimate sin. And the way they express it is this: it's like taking a cloak and putting a cloak over you. So now you say, well, what's in there? Say, well, there's somebody in there. Well, what's this cloak? That's Jesus. You see what I'm saying? Is what they say is Jesus is the cloak over us, so that when God looks at us, he sees Jesus, as opposed to the rotten crumb bum that we are inside the cloak. Crumb bum. Yeah, it's in the dictionary. Well, it will be, I'll call them. So you follow me? That so what the Catholic position is quite different, entirely different, and that is God made us as good, with a tendency towards evil. We are born with the goodness of God. So it's I don't want to use percentages, that's unfair, but I guess you have to. It's like 60-40, or 75-25, 90-10, whatever, and stuff like that. And so that's how God sees us. Many of our prayers are like that. It says, hope that God looks upon you, not the way you look upon yourself, but the way that God looks upon you. What does God look upon? Well, he sees all our dark spots, our sins, our difficulties, challenges. He sees all that. At the same time, what he does not see is the demon, the Satan, or the ultimate raunchiness of life. That can happen, but that's not what he sees. He sees in us. So anyway, let's continue here, because this has a magnificent conclusion. Not everything is lawful. Now, well, you might know this, because I sometimes I studied theology. You say, oh, where'd you do that? In theology school. Okay. Am I going too fast? So it was the union of all the religious orders put their professors together, and they had a union. So it was the theological union. And so we had our famous professors, they had theirs, and so we all went to that. But the Carmelites are always good to me, I tell you, and I just mentioned that over and over and over again. They have been nothing, and anyway, they've been, so they allowed me to go over at the same time to do another degree at Georgetown in philosophy. Well, it's kind of like, I liked it. And no, it was good in this sense. We didn't have cars and stuff like that. In order to get over to the school, we had these big GMC kind of trucks, that could have 9 people and stuff like that. I'm talking about a big one, and so anyway, now Washington, they have these circles, okay, and circles go around, so then you see all the limos, and all the stuff, and flags on cars, and all that kind of stuff, and then they go around, okay, and so I come along in my, don't, I'm just quoting, this is not my type of language, those big ass truck things was right there, as I didn't care, where I just stay inside the lines and you're okay, and everybody else, oh, there's the ambassador, so and so, there's the ambassador, says there's the ambassador from the 2nd floor at Whitefriars Hall. So anyway, you say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with this, and we paid $15. I'll bring some coins next time. So let's continue. This is very heavy stuff. See, what they're saying is whatever is law. The reason I mentioned the philosophy, now I know my connections today are not good, is that John Paul Sartre was a great existentialist after the war, and the existentialists were saying there is no God, there is no faith, there is no this, that, the other thing. You are the source of freedom, so therefore you are choice. We hear that in all these ads on TV. They are against choice. How many times we heard that? Because one party has decided they don't want to talk about the economy. So all they talk about is, I listened the other day, there were 4 things right in a row about abortion. One ad after another, after another, after another. These people are wrong because of the fact they don't approve of abortion. Well, how about getting back to, some of the program? So, but anyway, that doesn't make any sense to say that your choice for Sartre, you're walking down the street, you don't like somebody, slap him. You say, why'd you do that? He's ugly. But that fits into the thing that you made a choice to do that, to slap ugly people. It makes no sense. So what he had to do then was to write big books. So he had a great big huge thick one of nonsense, because if you have just a prelude and then a page on nonsense, you say, well, I get the idea, it's nonsense. But here you have to go shovel through it. So you say, why don't you talk about something biblical? Okay, so let's go back to this. So when you say that everything is choice, it doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. See, in other words, you have to fit in within the realms of who you are as a human being. And he says, but not everything builds up. So in other words, our life is in two compacts that we make. One is to take my soul down, and the other is to build my soul up. I got a thing from one of my former students just today on email. I haven't seen it for 20 years, something like that. He's married, he's got a beautiful wife, and he had a costume on, and they both had a shirt on with the same stripe and stuff. And he had an ugly face, you know how you have a costume and stuff, and she was beautiful. So anyway, no need for a face there. She's beautiful. So I had my closure I put down, it says, and your wife, it says, we've been married 23 years, says, well, your wife, I says, has grown in beauty and wisdom. He was, which is true. Then I took a look and I put down, but you seem to have scarred your face and you're ugly, you know. He says, well, you're right, you know, and I'm just thinking, whoa, yeah, you know, so anyway, you got the message anyway that, so I'll just stop there. So anyway, let's continue with verse 24. No one should seek his own advantage, but that of his neighbor. Now, this is almost like the law of life. The famous Burton story is, you know, that you are a gift, but you don't become a gift unless you give yourself away. You know, if you're just a wrapped package, then you're going to sit on the shelf, maybe in the closet. But if you are a gift, then you have to give yourself away to become a gift for somebody else. And if the whole world is like that, then we are nothing but gift givers. So that's what this is. So it says, no one should seek his own advantage, but that of his neighbor. See the prodigal son there. Who is willing to take on the prodigal son? Not the older brother who doesn't even use his name. Not the older brother. He says, that's son of yours. As if he had nothing to do with it. You know, he should have been the one to run down for him and bring him back. No, but no, he didn't do it. Why? So anyway, but who is it? It's the father. You've seen that picture over and over again, haven't you, from the Hermitage of the father with his hands over the penitent. You know, you've seen that type thing. He's got two hands. One hand is very strong, like you know, a carpenter or something like that. The other one is very fanciful, like a piano player, like a woman. So you have a male and a female kind of on this guy's shoulders. And then you take a very close look at the father who's leaning down over. Why is he leaning down over? Because he's blind. See, he can't see. But here's the prodigal son in front of him. He doesn't see that. What he wants to see is arms of the family around the son. That's why they throw a party. So this mercy is aware of the difficulty the son is in, but he's practiced his confession. And so anyway, that's what he's talking about here. Eat anything sold in the market without raising questions on grounds of conscience. The earth and its fullness are the Lord's. It's a psalm. In other words, you are not to be eating stuff from idols. If an unbeliever invites you and you want to go, eat whatever is placed before you without raising questions on grounds of conscience. And so there, what he's telling you is that you don't believe for a second that this food has anything to do with the holiness or wholeness of a man across from you because he's placed it before an idol. So, but if someone says to you, this was offered as sacrifice, he says, then don't eat it on account of the one who called attention to it. I mean, not your own conscience, but the others. For why should my freedom be determined by someone else's conscience? Now we're getting to that thing about everything is lawful because he's saying, you are the one who makes the laws for yourself. See, this is connected. You are the one to make laws for yourself, and your laws have to be based on love of God and love of neighbor. What are the two commandments? Love of God and love of neighbor. I partake thankfully. Why am I reviled for that over and over, which I give thanks? In other words, see, there's this great debate going on between the Jewish contingent in Jerusalem and then the Christian Gentile group up in Antioch. It will all end at the year 70 when Jerusalem is taken over by the Romans and destroyed, absolutely destroyed. They cut down all the trees in the Mount of Olives so they can make crucifixes. They salt the earth so you can't grow crops there. So I just want to go on. Why should I? So avoid giving offense, whether to Jews or Greeks or the Church of God, just as I try to please everyone in every way. not seeking my own benefit, but that of many, that they may be saved. See, what he's talking there about is mutual responsibility, but he's also talking about himself as being an exemplar. In other words, if you are in Paul's group, his koinonia, then you are amazed at his holiness. You know, he can't walk well. He's got some kind of a disease. They don't tell you what it is. It could be, you know, something like the girl experienced. But anyway, so there is Paul, and he's a perfect example of it, working so that he doesn't have to take the charge of, you know, doing this for money, staying up. When he has in Ephesus, when he has his classes and programs, he has it in the middle of the day from like 10 to 2 or 3. Why is that? Because that's the time when people go home and go to sleep, have lunch and go to sleep. Whoa, what are you talking about? Well, you know, what he wants to do is take, but they have the free time of the people is a good time for him to do it. Because if you did it in the morning when they're at work, or the afternoon, evening at work, then you're not going to get anybody. So he opens himself up. So I've been inside the place where he did that. Yes. So anyway, just so I put down there on chapter 11, verse 1, because, you know, just because we didn't want to take it a whole page. He says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. That's his whole pitch. So now, how are you doing on time? It's 11:12, 3 minutes. Okay, well, let's see this poem that's here by Robert Frost. Okay, I'm a fast reader. Okay, now that you've read it. And then I also have a page here that is from a homily published in a magazine for priests, and it takes Paul's reading about penance and instructions to the Corinthians, and then all that kind of stuff. So if you want to have extra, you know, things to do, you can read these 2 pages. This from a mascot is a long poem by Robert Frost. It's very interesting. It's God talking to Job. I was enchanted by it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. But I found on the internet that there was a book published in the 1930s or something like that, an old beat up book that had the entire poem. So I sent away from it. Yes. Well, that's why there won't be a collection marked down in the treasurer's office this Sunday. But I got the book. I can't remember what it was, like $16 or something like that. So, but it contains this particular thing. So I'm kind of fond of this. Are you with me? Okay. So what we're doing then is now we've got up to through to these chapters here, and that brings us into the next chapters are going to be all on love and sacrifice and other things. So these are the heavy ones are coming up. So anybody want to make an observation or question? Or you can see me on the way out the door if you do, but otherwise, that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, people who are watching on Zoom, and all you people who are watching the recording. We're going to end the recording now, and we'll see you next week.